So we're in the sixth of 7 sermons that we dedicated to the book of Daniel this summer. This series is entitled Engage and Influence, and in week 1 we emphasized that throughout the history of Northway, this has been one of our core DNA beliefs, that this engage and influence culture. Rather than perch ourselves under church steeples and shake our fist and scream disapproval of the world we live in, or circle up our holy wagons and quietly condemn everything out there is bad and everything in here is good. Instead, at Northway, we believe our role as a church is to engage and influence the culture of today. And we do not do that through hate speech, nor do we do that by conforming to ever-changing winds of the social discourse. Rather, we engage in the conversation. We desire to understand, and we influence with love. And there's no better example of an engager and an influencer in the Bible than Daniel. As a teenager, Daniel, he witnessed the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. In Daniel chapter 1, in verse 3, King Nebuchadnezzar issues the following order. It says this: Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, which I love that name, first of all. Ashpenaz. If I had a son, I might. Ashpenaz. His chief eunuch to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family, of nobility, used without a blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding and learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. That was Daniel. He was one of the ones that was brought in, and the choice he had maybe was to shake a fist and scream hate toward those now in authority. Though I suppose that was an option, I don't think that would have went too well for him. He could have circled his wagons condemning the literature and the language of the Chaldeans, though an option. I don't think that would have been very successful. So Daniel made a decision to engage in influence, to understand those in authority, to serve with humility, to trust God in the difficult, hard moments, and to use his God-given gifts and live as a man of character and integrity. And as we've watched Daniel age now, as I'm going to be in chapter 9 today, he's an old man. He's lived his entire adult life in exile under the authority initially of the Babylonians, and then the Medes, and then the Persians. And Daniel has turned now to the words of an earlier contemporary. He notices that the prophet Jeremiah received and recorded a word from the Lord that 70 years must pass before the desolation and exile of Jerusalem would end. And in chapter 9, verse 3, after realizing this from the prophet Jeremiah, he now begins to go into a prayer. So Daniel 9, verse 3 is where I'll pick up. He says, Then I turned my face to the Lord, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy, and fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled. Turning aside from your commandments and rules, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and to our fathers, and to all the people of the land. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame. He opens his prayer not by shaking his fist or denouncing hatred to those that God has placed in authority over him. Rather, he basically prays, you're an awesome God, and we blew it. Sorry. In week 1 of this series, Pastor Kent, he preached from Daniel 1, a group of teenagers, including young Daniel, exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. And they did not want to defile their bodies, if you recall this sermon, by eating the king's food. And we saw how they engaged and influenced the hostile culture around them with humility, with wisdom and with hope. And then in week 2, Pastor Doug, he again talked about this young Daniel that he summoned into a very difficult situation and asked to interpret a dream, a dangerous dream of the king. And we saw Daniel, though he had wisdom and power, he acted instead with wisdom, and Doug used this word, tact. See, if we want to engage our culture, folks, the days of bullying and belittling people with the gospel are over. We simply will not be heard if our voices are shrill and condemning. In week 3, freedom, he took us into literally the fiery furnace and that story. He reminded us that in these challenging moments that we need to know and trust God to deliver. And then when God does deliver, we need to glorify him. And then in week 4, I dug into this fascinating story of King Belshazzar in the midst of a drunken orgy, using the gold and the silver vessels that were looted from the temple in Jerusalem. This disembodied hand appears and scratches out a very disturbing message on a wall. And Daniel boldly interprets the writing. And the very next day, that king would be humbled. His kingdom would come to an end, and he would die. And in that week, I challenge us all to engage and influence culture, but to make sure that we check our pride and our swagger. If you remember, I used that word in that sermon. And from there, we stepped out of Daniel for a few weeks, and we did a 3-part series called Umbrella. Anybody recall this? We heard countless conversations from you. Though that you know that God's grace and hope is available to you, that somehow at times we feel lost in this downpour of life. And during week 1 of that series, we talked about how sometimes our past failures and our mistakes leave us feeling soaked in shame and in guilt. And in week 2, we discussed sometimes it's not about our own mistakes and failures, it's about what someone has done to us, that we've been betrayed or wronged or wounded. And then week 3, we took a look at candidly, what if the hurt that we're experiencing that feels like we're outside of God's grace came from within the walls of the church? What do we do with that? And this series was intended to help us rediscover the grace and the hope that is available to you in your life through Christ. And from there, we took a little short 2-part series called Multiply. And we learned about this epic journey of 4 lepers dying in a famine, an opportunity that they had, and which we also possess, to multiply God's blessing as a church. You know, we expressed our vision that weekend as a church to diligently and deliberately multiply in this city. And then the second week of that series, our friend Dave Buring joined us, and he challenged us to continue this call to multiply by making disciple makers. Last weekend, if you were here, we dedicated the entire weekend to our Family Matters ministry focus. We jumped back into the book of Daniel, literally into the lion's den with Daniel. So why did I just take you on that recap of the last 10 weeks of our preaching? Because that's who we are as a church. You know, if you've been with us over those 10 weeks, I want you to know that it's almost like maybe as if you've been sitting in the back seat of a car, and in the front seat is a conversation going on about what is at the core of Northway. And our core is this: we deeply desire to engage and influence Pittsburgh for Christ. Secondly, we are a church that is going to preach grace and hope from this platform. We have a vision to multiply in this city and a deliberate strategy of making disciple makers. And we are passionately committed to our kids and students through our Family Matters ministry. And today, I want to reveal one more piece of who we've been and who we are as a church. But first, let's head back into this text and pick up right where I left off. Daniel's prayer, something amazing is about to happen. In Daniel 9, verse 18, I'm picking up. In this prayer, he says, "Give ear, our God, and hear, open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. We do not make request of you because we are righteous, but because of your great mercy. Lord, listen. Lord, forgive. Lord, hear and act. For your sake, my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. While I was speaking, he says, and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill. While I was still in prayer, here it is, Gabriel, the man that I had seen in an earlier vision, came to me in swift flight. About the time of the evening sacrifice, he instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. And then he'll go into the vision here in a minute. In Daniel 9:18, as he continues in this posture of humble prayer, confessing first his sins, it said, and then the sins of his people. And just a quick pause here. Daniel, it says, first confessed his sin, and then the sins of God's people. I think there is something right there to help us understand the best way to get God's attention, right? I mean, maybe we should first, in prayer, come clean with our mess before we start to swirl around with all the mess that's around us. And when Daniel did this, God heard his prayers, and the angel Gabriel rushed to respond to Daniel's cry. And we've encountered Gabriel before, just in the previous chapter, in chapter 8. Notice that this Gabriel is the same angel that's found in the New Testament in a revelatory role. He appeared to Zechariah, and he told him about the birth of John the Baptist. And then most significantly, right, he appears to Mary, and he informed her that she was going to have a child whose name would be Jesus, who would be called the Son of God. And what Gabriel says to Daniel, it's found in the very next verses, 24 through 27, are probably some of the most difficult verses of Daniel. I would go to say as they might be some of the most challenging verses of the entire Bible. You know, it's been subjected to many, numerous interpretations. You know, these interpretations of what it is Gabriel says next run this large gamut of being seen as a prediction of the birth of Jesus, being seen as a prediction of the end times. There's another group that feels like that their argument is this text that Gabriel said, this vision, has already been fulfilled. During the Maccabean period, that's the time before Christ, between the Old and the New Testament. The Hebrew of this section right here is very complex. It's very obscure and puzzling, and it's not really clear. Here is the text. I'm just going to throw it up. I'm not going to read it, but their opening words, literally, it says 77s. Does that mean weeks? Is it years? Some translations in verse 25 specifically say the Messiah, which tips their hand maybe as to who they think it is. But in this version, the anointed one, it leaves the door open for many interpretations. Does Gabriel's mysterious math here reveal a possible timeline for the end times? Or is it set up to be the last days until Christ comes? Or is this desolator, the Antichrist? If I could, I would just put a big question mark over that. See, hear me on this. I think end times prophecy is worth studying. It's part of God's word. And the question is are we expending an inordinate amount of time trying to discern the end when Jesus himself said he didn't even know when the end would come? I can't answer that for you, but I think it's a question that maybe you have to ask yourself. You know, Jim Platt is a member of our teaching team. And in fact, Jim will preach the final sermon next weekend and close up this Daniel study. Jim, probably one of the most learned guys I know when it comes to God and God's word. You know, he's fluent in Greek and in Hebrew. He has this vast understanding of many of the challenging theological issues, from end times to second coming to heaven to hell to predestination to free will. And he once told me that one of his greatest regrets in his theological career and his personal walk with Christ is that he allowed the topic of eschatology, the end times, to consume him for many years. And in the end, he asked this question, why? Why did I do that? Again, there's nothing wrong with studying the material. The issue is, have you made it maybe an unbalanced fixation? So let me talk about unbalanced fixations for a minute, okay? So here is where I'm going to most likely step on some toes. So if you haven't been, if you sort of zoned out somewhere in the Gabriel prophecy, come on back in, okay? I'll try to be broad and wide as possible to assure that we're all included. I want to be an equal opportunity toe stepper. No matter your age, gender, or race, I want to reach across both aisles and be an all-encompassing toe stepper here. So Northway, I believe as Christians, we all too often allow our religious focus, passion, advocacy, energy, resource to go sideways and distract us from the main thing. There are dozens of views from brilliant scholars and theologians that have weighed in on the second coming of Christ. Jim, for example, told me he has over 50 commentaries on the subject. I have very little interest in sorting through all of them theories and reading all these controversies. All I know is he's coming back because he said so. And I don't know what your fixation is. New earth, old earth, creation in 7 days or over 1 million years. I have met folks that are so consumed with the gift of the Spirit, speaking in tongues that it's almost exhausting to me. And I've got news for you. At times, your fixation might be fatiguing the people around you. Right? I've met some folks that are just way over-consumed with the work of the enemy in our lives. It's like Satan is behind everything from the hurricanes to a stubbed toe. And you might think you are doing, God's bidding by putting your nose into another book on the last times or any other theological issue. But my question to you is, what are you potentially missing that is going on right around you? Okay, I'm not done. As Christians, I believe distraction from the main thing also bleeds into the cultural issues of our day. If a certain hot-button, controversial, challenging issue of today's culture becomes your main religious focus, passion, advocacy, study time, and energy, then I believe you are being distracted. 100 years ago, there were deep issues of spiritual, theological, and cultural issues facing us. And if we would fast forward 100 years from now, there'll be a new set of them facing us. And some of these are certainly issues that we should be concerned with. We should attempt to understand. We should speak into them in truth and love. However, they should not consume us. If you are a one-issue Christian, and Jesus Christ and his mission is not that issue, then you've been deceived. And the book of James puts it this way in chapter 1, verse 26. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless to the people around them. Becomes worthless when our mouths roll on and on about specific theological topics, or when with prideful confidence we believe we've cracked some spiritual code to a complex matter, or when we hatefully condemn or arrogantly defend complicated cultural issues of the day. We have been deceived, and our religion becomes worthless to people that desperately all around us need to know the hope and the grace that can be found in Jesus Christ. Look what the very next verse says. James 1:27 says this: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. What is pure religion? It is care and love to those in need. And be careful not to get sucked into the sin of the world. Our religion should not be our denomination. It should not be conservative or liberal. It is not based in a camp, this camp or that camp. It's not based in polity or traditions. It's not our perspective on a viewpoint or a theological or cultural issue of the day. Our religion should be the way that we care about the people that God's placed in our lives, and that we live in this world but not of it. Folks, religion doesn't have a very good reputation in our world today. And if we would all just go about doing pure religion, I believe that we could change the church's reputation in one generation. Earlier in the book of James, just back it up like 5 verses, 22, he says this: do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. When it comes to pure religion, to helping those in need, local and global mission, this has been who we have been at Northway and will be always at Northway. And over the past 5 years, we have recommitted our emphasis to local and global mission efforts. And we've strived to do what it says. Many times from this platform, we have issued this pretty bold challenge. And it's this, we say this: our goal is that 100% of folks that call Northway home get involved in some type of a missional effort. That doesn't mean that everyone goes on a mission trip, but it does mean that our hope is that everyone participates in some way in some pure religion effort. You may not be aware of this, but about 5 years or so ago, really a concerted effort to focus our mission effort and resource. And this is our focus now. You've probably heard this too: to partner with and to resource organizations to aid orphaned, abandoned, and at-risk children and develop indigenous leaders who carry out lasting and growing movements. One of the clearest expressions of this commitment to at-risk children is our ministry at Northway called LAMP. And it's this collaboration of Northway, Pittsburgh Public Schools, and Family Guidance, impacting the city of Pittsburgh and the area and the community of Homewood by mentoring one student at a time. Folks, this passion for bringing hope to the fatherless can also be seen in our orphan care ministry here. We attempt to raise awareness of the 147 million orphaned and abandoned children in our world. And our orphan care ministry does that through educating and equipping people to care for those children. One of the ways we do this is through an annual Orphan Care Expo that's held at our Wexford campus every single November. At the expo, if you would come to this expo, you would hear and have the opportunity to hear from 30 local and national organizations, everything from adoption to foster care to mentoring to human trafficking. Are you guys aware of this, that Northway has a justice team that partners with local organizations and government officials to rescue and provide support to those victimized by human trafficking right here in this city? We also encourage members to get involved with organizations like the Light of Life Mission on the north side. It's one of our long-term partners here at Northway. That they provide food and shelter and life-saving programs to the poor, to the homeless, and to the addicted. And those are just a few ways at Northway we practice pure religion here locally. However, our impact cannot be contained within these churches' wall or within the city limits. We have been called to have a global impact. The Pittsburgh Kids Foundation is one of those partners who have a vision that goes beyond our city into the country of Haiti. They are working there to empower and support orphans in Haiti so that they become the future leaders of their country, making significant contributions to God's kingdom and Haiti. Each year, do you realize we send trips along students and adults into Haiti to encourage and be with these orphans? Buckner International is another one of our key global partners. 3 times a year, folks, we send adult and student trips from all of our campuses to an area called San Pedro Sulu, Honduras. And we come alongside the orphanages and the churches there. A foundational priority at Northway is our global missionary partnerships, whether it's in Haiti or China, whether it's in Honduras or India, whether it's in Thailand or Turkey. Our heart is to provide ongoing and relevant care, and get this, to 28 global partners that we are connected with through consistent communication, personal visits, financial resourcing, and prayer support. And we are not done. We are currently right now developing, identifying, and training the next generation of Northway missionaries. Coming next summer, we are going to be doing something called a mission homecoming. We are going to be inviting all of our global partners back to Pittsburgh for a week-long celebration of what God is doing through Northway across the world. Can I just challenge it? What if every single person at Northway would get involved in some way in this mission homecoming next summer? Could you meet the need of a missionary while they are here in Pittsburgh next summer? Maybe provide food, open up your home, or help us with the retreat and the worship night that we're going to plan, and the weekend services. Maybe you could provide childcare for their children while they're here. Maybe you could loan them a car. I wouldn't loan them to any of our missionaries from India, though. I've been there and seen them drive. We will get them Uber. We'll set them up some other way. But seriously, folks, sign up today. There's a rep in all of our campuses lobby, and you can give them your information, and we'll keep you posted as the plans and the information come together. Can you imagine the possibilities of how we could overwhelm our missionaries next summer? Those that are on the front line ministering to the orphans and the widows, if every person at Northway would just get involved in this homecoming, we could love on them some way special next summer. So what do you do from here? Well, I suppose that's up to you. But here's a few suggestions. One is this: do something. Pray and ask God what you need to do. Maybe it is a mission trip. Maybe it's just simply giving to, we have an orphan care shoe drive going on right now. In a few months from now, we'll be doing our One Warm Coat New Toy drive. Maybe that's where you participate. Secondly is this: consider doing it with your family if it's possible. Look for ways to do pure religion and involve your kids. It has a potential to change your family dynamics and have an impact on them and the kingdom that could last forever. Third one is this: possibly try to do something anonymous. I have always found this to be an incredibly humbling experience when I do something to just help someone in need completely anonymously. It removes the pride and it releases humility. And it does something deep inside you. And the fourth one is this: do something that's a sacrifice, either to your wallet or to your comfort zone. Giving out of our excess is important. But I'm telling you that sometimes we need to do something that's going to be missed. We need to do something that's really going to stretch us. You can do pure religion for several reasons. You can help those in need because you know how fortunate you are. And you know that you need to do something for someone that's hurting. You can do it out of obedience to God because God calls us to do this. He desires that we engage in this. But here's one thing that I'm positive of. Whether you mentor a child in Homewood, attend the Orphan Care Expo, go on a mission trip, go to Light of Life, make a donation to one of our partners, here's what I'm positive of. You'll benefit more than them. God will do something deep in your soul when you step into transformational outreach, local, global mission, helping someone in need, pure religion. God will do something deep within you. So at Northway, we want to influence and engage the culture. We want to preach hope and grace. We want to, multiply our God's kingdom in this city. We want to pour our hearts into our kids and into our students. And then what we talked about today, we want to practice pure religion. If you're here today at any of our campuses and you're looking for a church, that's who we are. And if that's what you're looking for, we'd love to have you. If you've here today and you've been just sort of standing around out on the edge, can I just encourage you, come on in, because we need you. And then there's a third group of people here that have been consistently serving and pouring your heart and resources into this church for many years. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask the campus leader from each of our campuses to step up. They're going to pray, and they're also going to, speak to some specific mission, local efforts that are available to you right at your campus.